Hey everyone, really glad to be back and seeing you tonight. Quick announcement before we get into the episode for people listening live, and also we'll include it in the show notes for people on the podcast afterwards. We have another live event at a European friendly time next Thursday, which is July 1st, featuring Dave Gerhardt. We do that once a month, so we'll have Dave on there. We're going to cover a bunch of cool topics. Obviously, Dave and I work really well and communicate really well together. We've been getting awesome feedback, and so if you are interested in attending that, maybe MJ or Angelica could drop it into the chat for people that are here live, and we'll put them in the show notes for people afterwards. Again, that is Thursday, July 1st at 12 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Now let's jump into the agenda. I was trying to think about where I was going to start here because I've been talking about so much stuff today. And I've been thinking a lot, and I'll kind of provide some background to this as well. So when I started to build this model in like 2017, 2018 timeframe, the metrics that I was looking at were the metrics that collectively build pipeline velocity. And so when I was looking at pipeline velocity, the four metrics that would impact the velocity of pipeline are average deal size, win rate, sales cycle length, and number of qualified opportunities that you can generate with the win rate that you input into the calculation. And so I was looking at all four of those metrics for the reason that when I started to look and compare the impact that we were making on the inbound demand marketing side against outbound, and you saw the dramatic differences in sales cycle lengths and win rates and different things like that, I used it to try and show executives the ability that if we were able to scale this, the ability that it could impact the entire organization by providing a faster path to revenue and growth and scalability. And so I started to look at that. It's interesting. I talked about it when I started my company, and then I started to move away from it, and I've recently come back to it for the reason that we have about 30 companies that we do work for now, and enough historical data from a lot of companies to go and look at the progression about the changes that happen inside of their metrics and their revenue model. And so I started to pull that data, and I was like, wow, like we're over here reporting on qualified pipeline and number of qualified opportunities for companies, and that's what they're reporting back. But I'm looking at the data here, and we cut sales cycles by 60% over the past year, from 180 days to about 70. And the win rates of SQOs went from 20% to 30%, which is a major lift in terms of, if you imagine creating 500 sales qualified opportunities, instead of winning them at 20%, you're now winning them at 30%. That's a huge difference in terms of revenue for big deals. And so I started to look at those, and then I started to make pipeline velocity calculations across the customers, and saw that it amplifies and helps illustrate to executives the actual impact that it's making. I'm not going to go into the calculation of pipeline velocity. I did that on the previous Demand Gen Live episode for people that want to reference it. But it really does demonstrate the impact of this, accounting for the efficiency metrics that this model will drive in terms of sales cycle length and win rates when executed properly. And I think is a great way to illustrate to executives about those different things. Now, when we look at this I'm communicating to people that I believe over time you should consider this as a primary marketing metric. I talk about primary marketing metrics as qualified pipeline, revenue, customer acquisition cost per SQO. I think companies should consider adding this as a core metric that you continue to optimize against in marketing, because it accounts for all of the different levers that you can pull in order to drive more revenue. I see most companies and I saw it at the company where I built this model, the only way that they thought they could drive more revenue was by creating more leads, which in theory would create more opportunities. So they're only trying to pull one lever out of the four. Didn't spend any time on sales cycle length, didn't spend any time on win rate, didn't spend any time on trying to increase average deal size or possibility for expansion or different things like that. And so it makes available to you as a marketer a lot of different things that you could use to, one, demonstrate to executives, but also as a way to impact them. Improving conversion rates at one stage of the funnel, which I spent a ton of time on, specifically demo conversion to SQO, and trying to move that number at the quote unquote top of the funnel. And if you're able to improve that conversion rate, it flows all the way down. And so I believe that companies should consider this as a primary metric to optimize against. Now, when it comes to time, and it's an interesting thing that we saw in the data as I started to look at companies, is that if you're like taking over as a CMO, or if we're going in and helping a CMO, the impact on pipeline velocity will not be shown in the data until the pipeline that you're creating begins to close. Because 3 out of the 4 metrics are based on close won historical deals, not leading forward metrics. I'm happy to answer. I'm going to pause, and hopefully if someone has a question on that, I can clarify in more detail for people. But I'll give you an example, when we take over at Refine Labs and go in to help a company, for the first, somewhere between 3 and 6 months, any revenue that comes in is pipeline that was built before we were working with that company. And and anything that closes is going to be from previously created opportunities that will then, 3 of the metrics will be input into a pipeline velocity calculation. The only metric that you can control in the short term is qualified opportunities. And so what I'm recommending to people, if you were going to go and do this, is that qualified pipeline or number of sales qualified opportunities, depending if your ACV is static or dynamic, that you focus on that for at least the first 6 months, potentially 12 months, while you build pipeline. And then when a majority of the close won deals have become deals that were created once you started, then you shift and transition to pipeline velocity as a main metric, which accounts for qualified pipeline and sales qualified opportunities created, but also includes all of the other metrics that are important. And so that's my thought on pipeline velocity. After looking at a lot of companies, I'm incredibly pleased with the impact that we're able to have. And anyone that's executing a model like this would be able to demonstrate the same impact. And so, I couldn't push people more to at least make the calculations year over year. Go back 12 months, make the calculation for a 3 or 6 month period of time, 12 months ago, and then make the same calculation during the same time period to account for seasonality in that. And then also make sure that COVID wasn't in your time period, so it wasn't messed up. And then you could actually make the calculation in the future and compare those 2 numbers. It would show you, are our sales cycles getting longer? Are they getting shorter? Are we creating more qualified opportunities, or are we creating less? And so it gives you good data to go a little bit deeper to figure out what is possible to optimize to get the biggest impact.
I think a lot of companies don't think hard enough about how sales cycle length is important, like why a shorter sales cycle length would improve their business outcomes. Why do you think that companies don't focus on that metric?
Because my belief is that they don't focus on it because they don't feel like they have a strong control over it. And so I think that that's the main lever, right? They think that they're impacting it with their sales enablement team, by having Challenger or some other sales trainer come in and do that type of stuff, by those types of things, that they think that's the best way to impact sales cycle. Like, the best way to impact sales cycle length is to put people at the beginning of the sales process that are more ready to buy. And when people are more ready to buy, it takes less time to close the deal on average, right? Maybe you'll have one-offs in different places, but it's been interesting for me to reflect on this, because a lot of the efficiency companies look inside the system. And what I found to make the biggest efficiency gains is to focus more on the inputs of the system, aka leads. And then if you run the pipeline velocity calculation, and you were closing deals in 90 days instead of 180 days, and you're still creating the same amount of opportunities within that clip, you're moving pipeline through your system dramatically faster over a period of time, which creates the foundational infrastructure that if you scaled it, you would get the big gains.
How did you first realize that pipeline velocity was a metric that people should be looking at?
I was deep in data. I think it's one of the reasons why I'm able to explain this so much. I was working for a company that was 100% sales focused. Spent $29 million a year on sales and spent $3 million a year on marketing. And so you get a sense about how that budget was being allocated, what they prioritize, things like that. And so I was digging in the data because I knew how well the shit that I was doing was working, to try and help demonstrate to executives the reasons why it was working better in order to influence them to consider investing more in marketing so we could go and grow the business faster and in a much more efficient way. And so as I started looking into the data, I saw those different nuances. I saw that our pure outbound SDR opportunities would close in 210 days and win at 7% qualified opportunities to revenue. I saw that our inbounds would win at 35, 33, 35% and close in 65 days. And I'm like, if we just spent more money and time trying to fill this pipeline with these types of people, we probably wouldn't even need that function. And so that was the way that I started to figure it out, is just by looking deep, thinking like a CEO, and then trying to communicate back the reason why it's a good metric to consider in terms of how fast you can grow. Thanks for keeping that conversation going with some questions. Cool. We'll move on to a second topic, and then we'll kind of do what we've been doing in the past, which is move to Q&A and then catch the third topic at some point later on, which would be cool. I threw this one on the agenda without really knowing exactly what I was going to talk about, which ironically becomes some of the best content sometimes. And so I'm brainstorming here a roadmap to launch and build a community. And I want to reflect on how all of you are here, right? And so, and use it because my belief is that a lot of the companies and employees that listen to this podcast work at companies that create metrics and systems that de-incentivize you to build a community, or the metrics are in direct conflict in what you would need to build a successful community because of the short-term transactional focus of that thing, which people just don't want to be a part of long-term. And so I'm trying to create a roadmap so that companies can see what we did and then consider whether or not something like that could work for them, or at least try and test it. And so I think the first place to start is your ideal customer. And what I'm encouraging companies to do is not think about the ideal customer profile that they put on their investor deck. I'm communicating to people, what if you started to continue to segment down to truly the people that are power users, need your product, there's no other alternative because something that you do or something about it is just unstoppable. And so if you could get down to those people, then the next part is, what type of content do we need to create in order for them to show up on a weekly basis? This is probably the hardest part. Defining your ICP is easy if you have discipline and you go through the process. Figuring out what stuff to create so that people come back every week to learn for it is I think a really challenging thing, because you need a unique perspective and you need someone that can truly provide value to people. But I believe that the route to building a community actually is best served content first, especially if you're a business that does not intend on monetizing that audience based on some type of membership. And so if it's mainly to build a community to communicate your narrative, to get people on board with your mission, which then potentially leads to some type of consideration for your product, which is, I think, what most people listening to this would be trying to do, then starting with content that forces you to be able to put on an event on a weekly basis that people want to come to, I think is an amazing place to start. And then if you're able to get people to show up on a weekly basis, then you can think about what other elements could I add to make this more valuable for people. And so I think that's an interesting progression. I think that a lot of, I see companies that use a community more for customers only, which is more like a customer success power user type of group. And I think just based on the acquisitions that are happening by Outreach and HubSpot and other companies, buying a community or buying some type of media entity in order to do that is a clear signal that if you might not be able to go out and acquire one company, it's far better, and to be honest, far easier if you have the right mindset to do it yourself. And so pushing companies to consider that, I think it's a huge opportunity. Not a lot of companies are doing it well. You could consider doing something like this, similar to what it would be to have built a podcast in 2016 or earlier, similar to what it was like for me to be running B2B Facebook ads in 2016. It's a opportunity that a majority of the market will not move on for a long time. And that's what you're looking for in marketing, because you could have 2 or 3 years before anyone in your competitive set realizes to do something like this. And I think it's just it's a really big opportunity. The only way, and I talk about this quite a bit, the only way that that you're set up to capitalize on an opportunity like this is if you've spent potentially years building talent and resources and process and understanding customers deeply to put together a content strategy that people would actually show up for. And so it's a recurring theme that I'm going to continue to talk about here, is that as you continue to build skills and internal IP inside of your company, you are much more able to see opportunities that you might not see before, and you're much more equipped to capitalize on those opportunities because you have the right people and talent and mindset in order to actually do it. And so it's interesting when you think about like the Clubhouse gold rush was just a ton of companies that didn't have a good content strategy on any platform that thought just because they moved to Clubhouse early, they were going to be successful. You need two things. You need to see the opportunity, but you also need to have the infrastructure to capitalize on it. And my belief is that most companies, they probably see the opportunity, or at least it's pretty hard not to see the opportunities when they present themselves, but they lack the organizational mindset, the metrics, the capabilities to actually capitalize on it. And that's what I'm encouraging people to build.
So a question we got earlier at the Norwest event kind of speaks to this, which the person was asking, how do we leverage our expertise? We're in a 100% technical shop with deep knowledge, but we struggle getting exposure with organizations to build trust. So it sort of sounds like they assume that they need the organization, or they need to access the organization's audience to distribute their knowledge and expertise.
I'm not sure if there's enough context to answer that question. Do you think there is?
I think you could probably speak to, how you would go about accessing the audience without necessarily having to rent it from somebody who already has one.
Yeah. We are in the year 2021, where the distribution of information on the internet and communication between people has been completely disrupted from 10 years ago, right? And so I don't need to go to a trade show in order for somebody to show up at my booth. I don't need to sponsor some newsletter to put it in the email in order to get in communication with that person. I don't need to do any of those things with a third party, because the third party at one point controlled the distribution between me and that person. I don't need them anymore. I can go direct to the consumer, just like what's happening in every business. If you look at e-com, the exact same thing happened. If you were an e-commerce brand 20 years ago and you wanted to go out, you needed to go through retail, because retail owned the customer. They had the infrastructure, they had the distribution network, and you couldn't go around them because there was no way to do it. And now 21 years later, there are massive hundreds of millions of dollars to potentially billions of dollars of revenue organizations that sell a product that competes with retail products, that they go direct to consumer, they keep the 30 or 40% margin, and they go and get direct communication with their customers, build those relationships, and try and build recurring revenue streams around that. So I think that's a good comparison here, is like, you don't need any of those people in order to do it. What you need to do is you need to figure out, where are those people? And then, do I need to use paid or organic in order to get to them? The recommendation for most companies is both. And then, how am I going to earn their attention by providing something that's valuable?
You said earlier that companies with bad content strategies tried to go on Clubhouse, and it didn't work because they didn't have the organizational capability to succeed there or anywhere. What do you think is preventing companies from actually trying to build the organizational capability?
It all starts with mindset. And so people probably see this from me on LinkedIn a lot. The only way that things change your mindset, which allows you to change your metrics, which allows you to change your execution. Companies that are starting at the execution layer most often will fail for that reason, because the metrics are set up in a way that you will ultimately fail, or the things that you're doing are not aligned with the mindset of the people that actually make decisions inside of the organization. You need to change the mindset first about what are we actually trying to do in marketing, what's important, which then allows you to set new metrics potentially, which then allows you to change execution. So if you look at this at a mindset level problem, the metrics drive behaviors that would create short-term focus on Clubhouse, which would push people away. Secondarily, because the metrics are set up that way, the organizational talent gets built around those metrics. So you wouldn't necessarily, very few companies have a person that's a expert, a thought leader for their buyers on their marketing team. It'd be an amazing hire for a company to make, especially a company that has more than 15 or 20 marketers on their team, to have somebody that's done their buyer's job and is incredibly credible in the industry to work on your marketing team. But a lot of companies don't think like that because of the mindset and the metrics that get set up. And so because of those things, you don't have necessarily the right talent, or you might have the right talent, but you're not incentivizing them to do the right things to figure out the processes in order to capitalize on it. And so I interact with a lot of companies that I feel that it always starts at executive mindset about what marketing is.
If you were a CMO, at what point would you try to hire that industry expert as you built your team to work full-time on the team?
If you didn't have it in your company, the funny thing is that a lot of companies already have that person inside of their company. I'm watching cybersecurity companies do this quite well, at least a couple that have been on our podcast, where they have someone like a chief information security officer or several of them that work on their team, analyze data, create good content that then the marketing or demand gen team can distribute, which is an excellent model, right? Any company that's selling you to finance that they have a CFO in their company. Could their CFO be the guest on the podcast, or are they too busy doing other stuff? And so those are some things to think about. It's, can you get an internal, do you already have that person on your team? Is that person capable of taking that job, or do you need a second person? For me, for instance, like, let's go into an example. If I was a marketing leader, we were selling into, there's a persona that I have no idea about. If we were selling into like large construction firms, for instance, I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that industry. I don't know anything about that buyer for the most part. And if I was the host of the podcast, those people wouldn't think that I'm credible and wouldn't listen to the information. And so if I was putting that together, I would think that somebody that was whoever the exact job title, or somebody directly on the org chart one level below that person, would be one of my definitely first 10 hires, potentially first 5. Mm-hmm. I think at the beginning, I would leverage external people, talk to thought leaders, industry experts, and potentially prospects or customers, have them come on our podcast to get it moving. And then I would convert it to a subject matter expert that works at our company, that becomes the host, spokesperson of our podcast, and can drive our narrative into the market with the audience and the momentum that's already been built.
So someone asked a specific question about a follow-up question about this Clubhouse Gold Rush topic, which is, what is your take on Spotify Green Room in terms of creating a community? They implemented the ability to record live conversations, which was missing from Clubhouse. Do you think it'll work, or do you think it's going to be another failed platform?
So I believe that the idea of Clubhouse has market validation based on how many people went and used it for a little while. I think when I listen to feedback from people, I hear about Clubhouse, I hear a couple of things. The content wasn't very good. I couldn't find the right room, or I just got tired of sitting in a room and listening to it for so long. And so I believe that for the most part, people want to be in an asynchronous content consumption world. I think that will be the primary consumption of content for most people, because you can do it at your time, whatever you're doing, and things like that. And doesn't need to be set around a specific time or date. So I think that a majority of the impact will happen in asynchronous content for people. It doesn't mean that you couldn't do a Spotify green room or whatever it's called, just like we're doing this on a Zoom. It would be pretty similar, except for it would be audio only. And so I think that Spotify, in terms of overall user experience, just the fact that they allow recording, I think they have a really interesting infrastructure to potentially have that work. But honestly, I'm not deep enough to make any clear recommendations. And at this point, I'm sort of on the record. So I'm gonna kind of skate away from this one.
Do you, so HubSpot acquired The Hustle, and, like there's now like startups that are getting in, not startups, but like big startups that are getting into like acquiring the media companies. Do you think that's going to become a more common thing, or do you think companies should build that in-house? Do you think building it in-house is better than acquiring it?
Yes to both questions. I think that companies should strive to build this in-house. But I also acknowledge, based on what I said earlier, that I think for a lot of companies, it's simply not going to work, because I think they set activities up like that to fail based on how they measure and other things like that. And so I think that it will be both. I think that the optimal path is to build it yourself. I think that other companies that are farther along that didn't do it will continue to acquire them solely because they value the attention enough to continue to do it. And it's basically, you're buying attention and you're doing an acqui-hire for a ton of different resources that know all of the things that you don't know. The challenge that I expect for these types of things is integration. I don't think that you have two very different companies that monetize in different ways with different cultures. I think that integration will be quite challenging for a lot of companies that do this.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the industry trade media business model has been around for a long time, but only recently did companies start to try to build that in-house.
Yeah, I think it's because of the fact that that the distribution, because of how distribution has changed, that companies get more demonstrable, clear value from making that acquisition than they would have 20 years ago.
All right, I'm going to throw you another question from the Norwest event earlier today, which is, as marketing teams get larger budgets, they get siloed. So if you're on the performance and paid team, how can you justify spending on social for awareness if the credit for those goes to organic or direct, like the CMO or CFO is looking for directly attributable revenue?
You either change your measurement model, or you run performance marketing, or you find somewhere else to work. But if the measurement model is built for you to fail, then I wouldn't try and do that, because it's going to show that it's not working. It's going to deem it a failure, even though it isn't. I'm trying to think of a good example for this, or a good analogy, but I can't think of one right now. But something needs to change in that equation, because the answer is you shouldn't do it if that's the case. You're set up in an environment where you shouldn't do that, which is basically my entire talk at the Norwest event today, which is that marketers get handcuffed to specific tactics in certain channels because of attribution, because of what that CFO thinks how to do marketing based on whatever they learned. And so we have executives that don't understand what's going on in marketing, that are making decisions about how marketing should be measured and how to allocate budget. And I just don't see it as the optimal thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, during that event, you were saying that there's a good argument to be made that brand and demand should be under one leader. Do you think that that would help like alleviate some of that tension?
It still wouldn't alleviate the the lack of direct attribution, which would deem the money, quote unquote, wasted when it's not. And so the org shift could help in some cases, but if the constraint is on direct attribution inside of paid social, you only got one move. If you need attribution, you got to run conversion-based stuff. And conversion-based stuff helps you measure things. It was interesting. I talked about it in the Norwest. I was listening to a little bit of what I said because I wanted to hear it back, and I think I can say it more clearly right now. It's fascinating how much CFOs want to be able to have direct attribution on leads that come from paid social and then never look at the progression of those leads to revenue. It's so funny. Companies are so data driven and so want to measure everything, but don't measure the impact on revenue. They only impact whether or not they have a lead and they can attribute it inside of HubSpot or Salesforce. And so I find that super fascinating in the sort of like polar ways of we must do it this way so that we can measure it, yet we're not going to look at the actual metric that matters and measure that.
David put an interesting follow-up to this. If you remove the attribution hiccup or it's no longer a problem, then do you really need to have separate brand and demand, or does it just naturally make sense to have brand and demand under one leader?
I think that having them under one leader is the optimal path, because when they become siloed, you have two teams that are on polar ends of the spectrum about what they're doing. You have a brand team that is not accountable to results, that does a lot of things that are ineffective or unmeasurable, but most likely are potentially able to be measured and are ineffective, but they still do them. And then you have the demand team that's so heavy on performance marketing and attribution, and you actually have nothing in the middle. And so my feeling is that if you had one leader that could bring them together, that becomes accountable to certain things, right? It's a unique person that can think about things at a brand level and a demand level put together. I need to be accountable to business outcomes. I need to make this cost efficient. I need to figure out how to prioritize which activities I should do based on the timeline that it's going to take to results. And I need to be able to think about our customer. I need to think about what's valuable to them. I need to figure out how to get them to come to our event every week. I need to figure out how to have them. What do I need to do to get them to choose our community that we're trying to build? And if you're able to find that person, which they're out there, I talk to them I talk to them every once in a while. They're out there. That if you could have that person, you would have a dramatically more effective team than those two teams separate.
What would you have separate in that scenario? Product marketing?
Product marketing, marketing ops, brand and demand, field, depending on the go-to-market model.
Interesting. So how do you differentiate between building a community and building a following?
A following are a bunch of people that listen to you. A community is a bunch of people that interact together.
And what do you do to encourage community instead of just a following? Because I almost feel like there's a playbook out there for building a following. You could see people building following. I don't think it's as easy to see what people are doing differently to make it a community and not just a following.
So I think you need to create scenarios that encourage people to interact with one another. I think that you need to have a clear vision and mission that everyone that's a part of it believes in. I think you need to provide an incredible amount of value to those people in terms of either personal or professional development that can spread across the community in terms of overall opportunity. I think those are some of the ingredients that make for a very good community. And when I communicate those ingredients, it becomes really clear to me why companies struggle with this, right? Most companies only think about what's in it for me. And the whole idea of a community is what's in it for everyone that's a part of it. What are they like? Anyone is only going to show up for an event for every week for 8 to 12 or even more weeks for some of the people on here, they're only going to show up every week if they're getting a tremendous amount of value that they can't get anywhere else, whether that's through new friendships and relationships, new job opportunities, learning, just an overall sense of community, believes in the mission. Like, those are some of the things that I think people should focus on if they're trying to figure out. You always have to think, what's in it for the other person.
All right, I'm going to bring Natalie on to ask a question here.
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
Hey, Natalie, good to see you.
Nice to see you. So I wanted to ask you a few questions about your Facebook ad experimentation. Like, how many do you run per month per client? How much money do you allocate for that? And then, like, what kind of campaigns types do you aim to have for each client as well? I know it's kind of a lot of questions, but
yeah, let me see if I can hit on these real quick. Typically on Facebook and Instagram, I'll just bucket them in one. The ads get built in the same place, get distributed, but throw across those two platforms just for people listening. Typically, the two types of objectives that we're working with is either traffic, which would be a landing page view objective, or I've been experimenting with reach because we use metadata audiences, and have noticed that when you use metadata audience with link clicks, you actually get only about 25% of the reach of the total audience size. And adjusting to a reach objective allows you to hit a lot more of the overall audience with lower click-through rates. So there's interesting trade-offs between the two. But again, it leads into the fact that I believe that the most of the value is in the impression and the consumption inside of the feed. So reach objective sort of plays into that. Given the iOS 14 updates and different things with the challenge and attribution, it's really hard to test that experiment fully and know which one is working better. And so not a lot of data on a clear way, but those are the two that we use depending on the situation. In terms of overall experimentation, I think it's a function of how much historical data do you have in terms of when you hit like certain frequency amounts based on the audience, how big is the audience size, how overall is the budget, and what's your allowable frequency. I've been capping. I want to get to a place where we're essentially capping frequencies at around 2.5 at the ad level. And so I've started to implement automated rules where if it gets above a certain amount of impressions and hits a frequency of 2.5 and is not the top performing ad, then start to shut things off automatically, which has been a nice efficiency driver and kind of let the algorithm do its thing. And so based on all of those different factors, we will determine a certain amount of creative. I think that it's probably somewhere between 6 and 20 total, depending on what's going on. And how another impact is just the overall company's goals and how the system is overall running, right? So if we know that over time we've been putting this much in, we hit on like 3 to 5 pieces of creative out of 20. So we know generally what's going to happen. Then over time, we can start to fill that system more with the hopes of hitting more often and just optimizing out. And then one key note for people is one thing that I do in terms of optimization that helps really well is I spend hyper aggressively for the first 2 to 4 hours in order to get through the learning phase and collect data against all of the ads, and then immediately can turn off a lot of the ads and let top performers keep going. So I try and accelerate that, the speed to the data so I can get to what I'm actually looking for.
awesome. And is all that like content focused? Like, are you just looking primarily to deliver value through paid, or are you looking to try to get people further down the funnel as well, like retargeting anybody, or are you just trying to get in front of the same people over and over for months?
We run retargeting, but the think of it's weird. I forget who I said this to today, but when I was really getting started on LinkedIn, CMOs would come to me and I would talk about the strategy, and then they would be like, but why aren't you converting them? Like, we're going to give them an ad. Why aren't we trying to convert them? And I was like, how many of my videos did you need to see before you came inbound to talk to me? And I would survey CMOs and they would say between 50 and 100 videos they watched. And so I'm like, so if that's what it took you to come and have this conversation with me, what do you think it's like for your buyer? And so I'm delivering the goal is to deliver valuable information that's relevant to business objectives, that helps people understand different things, that guides them through a process so that they are more aware of pain points that we solve that inside their business, because they see them, because they have an awareness to them. They are more educated on features that are clearly differentiated. So if they're going to move into a buying cycle, they prioritize those features because we know they're important to them, that they understand our narrative or position on the world because we're delivering videos of thought leadership inside of the feed, that they know other top customers that are in their industry or different things that already use us because we've done those things. And I'm thinking about it as just a consistent cadence of people knowing more stuff. And as people know more stuff, you build momentum and more people come to you. And so it's a communication channel. It's the idea that I can communicate with our customers if I wanted to, I could create a new piece of information, content, creative, or anything, and distribute it every day. A new piece of information every day, like I was a news channel. And so that's the methodology of the way that I think about it. I don't see almost anybody adopt that methodology. I think that's the winning formula on paid social for enterprise SaaS.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So
yeah.
that makes sense. So delivering content, delivering value, and then on their own time, converting over.
Precisely. Yeah. And there's, I think that, just to clarify for some people that might be listening afterwards, like, delivering value doesn't necessarily mean just like talking about things that are top of funnel that don't have a lot to do with your product. That's not necessarily delivering value. The idea that people just know more about what you do may not be attributed to value in what most people say, but it aligns with business objectives. So there's a mix of stuff going on here, right? And I'm just, I wanted to pivot because I have like a perfect segue into the third agenda topic, if that's cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the missing piece of product marketing, this was a perfect segue. I am consistently fascinated at how many companies that do not actively communicate stuff about their product to their customers, and they rely on a sales team to get someone into a meeting in order to tell them things that they could easily communicate to the whole market on their own. It's just incredibly fascinating. So I want to get into the missing piece of product marketing. The missing piece of product marketing, and this is not a call out on product marketers or anything. This is just, if you look at your business and you think about the idea of product marketing, one thing that's missing is the idea of getting all of the information that product marketing figures out and distributing that to your customers in an effective way where they actually understand it, right? I was fascinated when a couple of days ago that I posted on LinkedIn about the dark funnel, which is something that 6th Sense uses in their messaging, and how many people in the comments said, I'd never heard about the dark funnel. And I'm like, how? If you're 6th Sense, you just raised $100 million. How does not everyone in the market that's a potential marketer know what the dark funnel is? And those are the interesting things that I am thinking about. I don't, like, as a marketer, and a lot of people that are listening to this, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in here that work at accounts that are perfect fit customers for a tool like 6th Sense that have no idea about the inner workings of that product because they don't actively communicate them with the market. And it's almost every company operates that way. And so there's a way here for product marketing and demand, or probably product marketing and demand, to work together to figure out those different things, to actively communicate them to people, so that instead of doing one-on-one demos with people in a sales conversation, you can get broad consumption about everything that you're doing. And when you get broad consumption about everything that you're doing, you drive more word of mouth in the market, which ultimately leads to more people considering you. And so we're actively doing it with 30 companies, seeing really good results. I think some people should consider adding that to their product marketing playbook.
What does the ideal relationship between product marketing and demand or content look like? Because I think part of it is that like when the idea of product marketing was created, it was like product marketing figures out the messaging and then they hand it off to sales. And companies never went back and figured out how to hand it off to content or demand.
So I think, and I don't know here, I'm all just talking out loud. The first thing that popped into my mind on this one is that the two functions are siloed to a level where they don't have really much understanding about what one or the other is doing, right? And so I think that as a demand gen person, I was effective in working with our product marketing team, because before I joined that company to run demand gen, I'd done product marketing for 4 years. And so I could take all the things that I learned in terms of customer research, pricing research, doing overall like market research, qualitative surveys, messaging, working through that and testing that qualitatively with customers, and take that mindset and move it into demand gen. I think there's a huge risk in marketers' worlds of getting too siloed into their function, going too deep into a function, not popping up and being like, whoa, all this stuff in marketing. Jess Goss says it a couple of times. People call it demand gen or performance marketing or product marketing. It's just marketing. Like a marketer should know how to do all of these things. The specialization of roles, for whatever reason, has pushed people to consider, I just want to go deep in one thing. Marketing is not that complicated. You should know everything. You should know how to do every part of marketing, in my view.
I've had a couple of conversations with people in the last couple of months that find it extremely hard to hire a good product marketer. Why do you think that is?
I think there's two parts to this. One is that there might not be a lot of strong product marketers out there. That could be one. But I think the big one, depending on who's asking you the question, is that the hiring profile of these companies creates a additional filter that basically eliminates almost everyone. And so that could be, and I've experienced this before. So if you're a marketer at a manufacturing company, or a marketer at a financial services company or something like that, and you want to go and do marketing at medical devices, it's a closed system. Most companies will not hire outside of medical device, and they think that it's a good thing because they're bringing someone in with 2 years of experience in medical device that understands the FDA. But what you end up with when you do that is you end up with homogenous organizational thinking that doesn't innovate, because everyone thinks the same way because they've been doing this shit for 30 years. And so I think companies should consider, like, a lot of the strongest product marketers that I've talked to come from industries that are not SaaS. And I think there's a interesting sort of like, there's something interesting there. I think that you find the strongest product marketers in industries that align with a pragmatic marketing or traditional marketing framework that I don't see a lot of software companies adopt. And so if I was looking for product marketers, I would look for companies and industries that use that model.
In your view, like, what should the role of product marketing actually be? Because I see some comments in the chat here that is like, companies define it very differently. It's kind of vague, which presents kind of another hiring challenge. So, for example, some are just messaging people and others are like people that drive the product roadmap. So how would you define it?
Strategy. So I would break this into strategy or product marketing, demand gen or tactical comms, and field or like sales readiness. Something along those lines, if you had to break it. And then I guess demand and brand would sit in the same place, which is an executional layer, and product marketing feeds those type of things. I think that because it's called product marketing, it gets way too focused on the product and not enough focused on the overarching business strategy and how the products support those things. And so I think that product marketing includes customer research, identifying market opportunities, building a product roadmap, building messaging and validating messaging with customers, putting together any types of assets or collateral that might actually fall to field in this type of model, like putting together, defining the ideal customer because they've gone out and done the research to identify exactly who that is, what messaging is going to work, and how you're going to get into those accounts. Those are some of the things that if I was a product marketer, that's the first things that I would do.
I was listening to a podcast a while ago. We should try to have this person on our show sometime, but they were basically saying that's what the role of a product marketer used to look like early days in SaaS, like early 2000, and then somehow they just chipped away at it and it's become hyper specialized, and you lose that like general marketing competency that you're talking about.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, specialization inside of these companies, you lose general marketing competency across all the specializations and functions for the most part, which is, it's sad. Like, the reason that I believe that I'm a strong marketer is because I worked at companies where I could execute across the entire marketing set, from product marketing all the way to field. And the challenge for a lot of marketers is they get boxed into a specific thing due to specialization.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'll wrap you up with one more question, which is a career question from the Norwest event. This person is a sales and solution architect. So they do the whole pre-sale life cycle. They do their own marketing, they do sales, and they do kind of like a technical sales role. And that's basically they're doing their own marketing because it's the only way marketing gets done. Not sure where to go next in their career, and wondered what your thoughts are on that, given that they've got a unique background in sales, technical, and a little bit of marketing.
Yeah. So what I would call that is a full cycle AE with no marketing support, right? And so you could look at that as a thing that's challenging, but when you go and compare it against AEs that just basically do demos and send proposals because the rest of their role has been specialized out to sales engineers and SDRs and different things like that, you got a pretty attractive skill set, depending on whether the company wants to move to that model. And so I would, from a career standpoint, I'm not sure I recall the entire set of the end of the question, so I'm just going to answer it, that you should go and look for a company that has adopted a full cycle AE model, which a lot of companies still do that. And I think that a lot of companies that have a predictable revenue model will over time scrutinize whether that model is serving them and their customers anymore. And so I'd look for a company that has a full cycle model that also has a strong marketing engine that can fuel it. And those are the two things. And then once you're in there, I would figure out how to work more with marketing to build your brand. And like I've mentioned several times, that's the path to becoming the number one rep. The number one rep is being fully accountable to the full pipeline of being able to do prospecting and closing, being able to do modern business development through one-to-one marketing that they do on their own, and working at a company that has a strong brand and marketing engine to give them 30 to 60% of their quota every month or quarter.
Nice. That wraps us up, I think.
Cool. I think that, I don't know, like some people probably want to be here for another hour, but every once in a while on Demand Gen Live, it's nice to end a little bit early. And so appreciate you all being with us today. It's been really awesome. I think we're coming up on some type of milestone. I don't know whether it's 18 months or like some amount of episodes or something. I'll do some digging in the research and go and figure that out. We're not going to stream live, but on Sunday, Gaetano is coming up to Boston, and we are going to do a recorded. I don't know if people have seen one of the early videos we did in January of 2020. Gaetano and I in Miami did a State of Demand Gen 2020. Timing's a little bit different here because we're about midway through the year, but we're going to do a State of Demand Gen 2021 live from the studio. And so we'll probably record that on Sunday, do some post-production. That'll probably be up in video and audio format in HD within probably hopefully 7 days. The video guy's over here, and I'm just committed to a 7-day turnaround. So we'll see how we get there. But so look forward to that. Hope to see you again next week. We'll end there, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. Good to see you. Bye.